In August 2024, Intel announced 15,000 layoffs. 6 months later, in February 2025, that number reached 23,000. By October, 35,500 employees gone, nearly one-third of Intel's workforce eliminated in just 18 months. For those laid off in 2025, there was no severance package, just a cold email and an escort out of the building. The company that invented the microprocessor, that dominated computing for 4 decades, that had Intel inside on 80% of the world's computers, just posted a $19 billion loss. Meanwhile, NVIDIA's market cap hit $3 trillion. AMD captured 35% of the server market Intel once owned entirely, and TSMC manufactures chips for everyone except Intel. This is the story of how Intel missed 2 technological revolutions, mobile and AI, and what happened when they tried to catch up a decade too late. To understand the collapse, you need to understand the empire. In 1968, Gordon Moore and Robert Noyce left Fairchild Semiconductor and founded Intel Corporation. 3 years later, Intel invented the microprocessor. The Intel 4004, a 4-bit processor running at 740 kHz, contained 2,300 transistors and could perform 92,000 instructions per second. It was a revolution. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Intel didn't just make processors. They defined personal computing. The 8088 powered the original IBM PC. The 80386 brought 32-bit computing. The Pentium became synonymous with performance. By 2000, Intel controlled over 80% of the global CPU market. Their advantage wasn't just technological, it was architectural. The x86 instruction set became the standard. Every software developer wrote for x86. Every computer manufacturer built around Intel chips. The network effects were insurmountable. 2005, Intel generated $38.8 billion in revenue with $8.7 billion in profit. Their gross margins exceeded 60%. They were printing money. CEO Paul Otellini had just taken over, and Intel seemed unstoppable. Then Steve Jobs called with an offer that would have changed everything. 2006, Apple approached Intel about supplying chips for a new product they were developing, a smartphone. Jobs wanted Intel to build a low-power processor that could run for a full day on a battery. Intel said no. The margins were too low. Mobile chips sold for $10, while PC processors fetched $100 or more. Intel's leadership saw mobile as a distraction from their highly profitable PC business. Otellini later called it one of his biggest regrets. Apple went with ARM instead. When the iPhone launched in 2007, it ran on a Samsung chip based on ARM architecture. Intel dismissed it. They had tried mobile before with the X-scale processor and abandoned it. Mobile was low-margin commodity hardware. Let ARM have the scraps. Intel would keep the profitable PC and server markets. What Intel failed to see was that mobile wasn't a side market. It was the future of computing. By 2010, smartphone sales exceeded PC sales. By 2015, mobile processors were in everything: phones, tablets, cars, watches, even servers. ARM processors powered over 95% of smartphones worldwide. Intel's market share in mobile? Effectively zero. In 2016, Intel finally gave up entirely. They announced the cancellation of their Atom smartphone processor and exited mobile. They'd spent billions trying to compete and captured less than 1% market share. The empire that owned desktop computing had lost mobile completely, but an even bigger revolution was already underway, and Intel was about to miss that one too. While Intel focused on defending their PC fortress, NVIDIA was building something entirely different. In 2006, NVIDIA launched CUDA, a programming platform that let developers use GPUs for general computing, not just graphics. At the time, it seemed like a niche tool for researchers. Intel barely noticed. Throughout the 2000s and 10s, NVIDIA kept building the CUDA ecosystem. More developers, more libraries, more tools. Meanwhile, Intel doubled down on CPUs. They had Xeon processors dominating servers. Why would anyone need GPUs for serious computing? Then, in 2012, researchers discovered that neural networks trained exponentially faster on NVIDIA GPUs than Intel CPUs. Not just faster, hundreds of times faster. The AI revolution had begun, and it ran on NVIDIA hardware, not Intel. By 2020, the gap was obvious. Every AI startup bought NVIDIA GPUs. Amazon's AWS, Microsoft's Azure, and Google's Cloud all offered NVIDIA-powered instances. NVIDIA's market cap surged from $100 billion in 2020 to over $1 trillion by 2023. Intel introduced AI accelerator products, but they were late. NVIDIA had a 10-year software ecosystem advantage. Developers didn't want to rewrite code that already worked perfectly on CUDA. The numbers told the story. In 2021, Intel's revenue peaked at $79 billion. NVIDIA's revenue that year was $27 billion. By 2024, Intel's revenue had fallen to $53.1 billion, while NVIDIA's exploded to $130 billion. NVIDIA's gross margins hit 70 to 75%, the kind of margins Intel used to command. Intel's margins had fallen to 41%. The company that once defined computing had become and also ran in the two most important technology shifts of the century. By 2020, Intel faced multiple crises simultaneously. First, AMD was back. After nearly going bankrupt in 2015, AMD made a stunning comeback under CEO Lisa Su. Their Ryzen processors matched Intel's performance at lower prices. In servers, AMD's EPYC processors started winning major cloud contracts. By 2024, AMD held 35% of the server market, territory Intel had owned entirely just 5 years earlier. Second, Apple ditched Intel entirely. In 2020, Apple announced they were moving Macs from Intel to their own ARM-based chips. The M1 processor shocked the industry. It matched Intel's performance while using a fraction of the power. By 2023, every Mac ran on Apple Silicon. Intel lost their biggest PC customer. Third, Intel's manufacturing advantage disappeared. For decades, Intel led in process technology. They reached 10-nanometer production before anyone else. Then they got stuck. Their 10-nanometer process faced repeated delays. Meanwhile, TSMC kept advancing. By 2020, TSMC was manufacturing 7-nanometer chips at scale. Apple, AMD, NVIDIA, even Qualcomm, they all manufactured at TSMC. Intel's foundry advantage, the core of their competitive moat, was gone. The financial results reflected the crisis. Revenue dropped from $79 billion in 2021 to $63 billion in 2022, then $54 billion in 2023. 3 consecutive years of decline. In Q2 2024, Intel posted a $1.6 billion loss. The stock, which had traded above $60 in 2020, fell to $20. Intel was in free fall. In February 2021, Pat Gelsinger took over as CEO. He'd spent 30 years at Intel before leaving in 2009. Now, he was back to save the company. His plan was audacious. Intel would not only design chips, but manufacture them for others, competing directly with TSMC. They called it IDM 2.0, Integrated Device Manufacturer Version 2.0. The logic seemed sound. The U.S. had lost most of its chip manufacturing to Asia. TSMC made 92% of the world's most advanced chips. Geopolitics were shifting. China threatened Taiwan. The pandemic exposed supply chain vulnerabilities. If Intel could build American foundries, they'd have both technological and political support. Gelsinger lobbied Washington aggressively. In August 2022, Congress passed the CHIPS and Science Act, allocating $52 billion to boost domestic semiconductor manufacturing. In March 2024, Intel secured a preliminary agreement for $8.5 billion in direct funding plus $11 billion in loans. But there was a problem. Building leading-edge fabs is astronomically expensive. TSMC's Arizona fab cost $40 billion. Intel announced plans for fabs in Ohio, $20 billion, Arizona, $20 billion, and Germany, $16 billion. Each would take 3 to 5 years to build. Intel was burning cash while revenue declined. In 2024 alone, Intel spent $24 billion on capital expenditures and R&D while generating only $53 billion in revenue and posting net losses. The technical challenge was equally daunting. Intel needed to catch up to TSMC's process technology. They were betting everything on 18A, their 1.8 nanometer process. If 18 15A worked and attracted customers, Intel could become a foundry powerhouse. If it failed, they'd have burned tens of billions with nothing to show for it, and the clock was ticking. By mid-2024, Intel's situation was desperate. In August, Gelsinger announced 15,000 layoffs, 15% of the workforce. The company needed to cut costs by $10 billion annually. Intel also announced they were pausing construction on their German and Polish fabs. The $16 billion German facility was put on hold indefinitely. The Arizona and Ohio projects slowed down. Wall Street wasn't impressed. Intel's stock fell another 25% in a single day. Then, in December 2024, Gelsinger was forced out. After 3 years, the board had lost patience. His grand plan wasn't working fast enough. The company brought in Lip Bu Tan, a 65-year-old semiconductor industry veteran who'd previously run chip software company Cadence Design Systems. Tan had actually quit Intel's board in August 2024 after reportedly clashing with Gelsinger over the pace of restructuring. Now he was CEO. Tan moved quickly. In April 2025, reports surfaced that Intel planned to cut another 20,000 jobs, 20% of their remaining workforce. Unlike previous layoffs, these came with no severance packages. Employees received a single email notification. Former employees described being escorted out immediately. One engineer with 15 years at Intel wrote online, "It feels like Intel is throwing out loyalty with the layoffs. No severance, no warning, just a cold email. How do you rebuild trust after that?" By October 2025, Intel's headcount had fallen from 124,800 at the end of 2023 to just 88,400, a reduction of 36,400 employees, nearly 30% of the company gone. Intel's Oregon campus, once bustling with engineers, saw parking lots half empty. The Folsom, California facility announced another 58 cuts in November. Layoffs targeted not just middle management, but engineers and technicians, the very people needed to execute the technological comeback Tan promised. The human cost was severe. In communities like Hillsboro, Oregon, where Intel employed thousands, the layoffs devastated local businesses. Restaurants near Intel campuses closed. Real estate values dropped. Employees who'd given decades to the company found themselves competing for jobs with thousands of other laid-off tech workers as the broader industry contracted, and they were doing it without severance to cushion the transition.